Hi everyone and welcome to our webinar, Conquering the Query, Getting the Most Out of Social Media Monitoring. I'd like to turn it over to one of our hosts today, Jasmine Jom.
Hello everybody, thank you for joining us. I'm just going to introduce our presenters for today. So that's me, I'm Jasmine Jom, I'm the Product Marketing Manager here at Brandwatch, and I'm joined by Gemma.
Hi, I'm Gemma. I'm a project manager at Brandwatch. And just to tell you a little bit about my role, it involves managing client projects with varying social media monitoring objectives using Brandwatch. And as part of this role, I spend a lot of time writing and optimizing queries to ensure our clients have access to good quality data for analysis.
And I'm also joined by Jeanette.
Hi there, I'm Jeanette Pazer. I work for DragonSearch, and I do digital marketing, all sorts of varieties of search engine optimization, social media community management strategy, and content development, and I have a background in computer science and software engineering.
So just a few things before we get started. So social media is all about engaging and sharing ideas, so feel free to join us today. You can ask questions in the session chat, and then we'll be doing a Q&A section at the end where we'll get through all of your questions. So if you have any questions throughout about what we're talking about or any particular queries you've got about queries, then feel free to write those in the box. You can also tweet either at Brandwatch or at DragonSearch. And if you want to tweet about a discussion, use the hashtags #SMM and #Boolean. But if you don't want to get involved and you just want to listen in, then that's fine too. We'll be making a copy of this presentation and a recording of the webinar available in a couple of days, so we'll send that out to you in case you want to listen again. So today we're going to give you a short introduction into who Brandwatch and DragonSearch are, just to give you a bit of background in case you don't know. Then we're going to talk about why queries are important and why it's important to write good queries. Then Jeanette's going to talk us through a case study of writing a complicated query that she did recently for a DragonSearch white paper. Then we're going to give you some top tips, and then we're going to go through your questions, as I mentioned. So just a bit about Brandwatch. We're a social media monitoring and analytics platform. We basically crawl the web, and then clients use our platform to analyze conversation about their brands or their competitors or any topics they're interested in. We've got over 700 clients around the world and offices in the US, Germany, and the UK, and we're about 130 employees at the moment.
And I work for DragonSearch, based in New York. We're a digital marketing agency that specializes in social media marketing, search engine optimization, digital advertising, PPC, conversion rate optimization, and we also do training workshops.
So just a bit about why are good queries important. So for those of you who might not know what queries are, so queries are the search strings that are typically used in social media monitoring tools, and they collect mentions of a brand or a topic or an author or whatever you're searching for. Typically they're constructed using keywords and Boolean operators. So what are Boolean operators? If you've ever done a complex Google search, you might know some of them, such as and, or, but they're basically terms that are used to tell the system how to match the keywords. So some common ones here, I won't go through them all in detail, but you might be aware of some of these, so and, or, not, the use of brackets, and also the use of quotes for phrases. And then there's some slightly more advanced ones. I'm just going to go over these quickly because we're going to be mentioning them just to make sure you understand. These might not be available in all tools, they're all available in Brandwatch, but the range of operators for different tools does vary. So just to talk through those, so we've got the near, which says that it should match when it finds one word within a certain number of words of another word. So for example here we've got apple or orange near 5, so within 5 words of smartphone or phone. Next we've got raw, which basically matches a word in exactly the way it's written, so it's case sensitive and also takes into account special characters. So example here we've got is Google+, so that'll only match when the word Google+ is written with a capital G and with the plus sign. The next is the wildcard asterisk, which basically says that it can match when the root is the same. So the example here is complain, which will also match anything that's complaints, complained. It's anything that starts with complain and then has however many characters afterwards. Then we've got the wildcard of the question mark, which replaces one character. So it's particularly useful for if you're looking for words in both US and UK spelling. So for example, here we've got customize, and the question mark is replacing either S or Z. So it's just a quick overview so that when we mention them later on, you'll know what we're talking about. So why are accurate queries important? Queries can be quite complex to write, especially if you've got a tricky brand name. But a well-written query means you get good quality data. It's much easier to work with clean data. You have lower volumes, there's less irrelevancy, you're not wading through lots of irrelevant mentions that you don't need. Analysing inaccurate data is pointless and pretty misleading. You can get lots of false insights if your data isn't actually relevant or accurate. And in some tools you might be charged according to the data volumes or have limits on how much data you can collect. You don't want to be paying for data that you don't need. So Jeanette's going to talk us through now a case study about writing a complex query that she recently did for DragonSearch.
Okay, well, this kind of came about, the white paper idea, from a convergence of a couple of issues. We have clients that have names that were, brand names that were tricky. They included initials or maybe apostrophes that may be misplaced. And at the same time, I was also sampling other social media monitoring tools, and I found that when I combined some of these tricky client names with these other tools, I couldn't create the queries that I really wanted. Most of the tools did not have the information I needed to determine that they had limited query functionality until I actually got a trial version and gave it a try. And in most of the cases, it's a user interface limitation. They present their query like 3 boxes, where you throw in any keywords that you want to have at least one of those words appearing in the mentions, or all of those words appearing, or none of the words. There's no way to actually use parentheses or set up how you want to, what order you want to do the query in, any way to specify that you want these words near each other with proximity. There are a lot of limitations. And so it also seemed to be a lack of understanding on how to create complex queries. Just talking to various people and reading reviews of the tools, people don't really talk about how robust you can make a query and to get the information that you want, or people don't really understand Boolean operators. So I thought it was a good opportunity to write a white paper to discuss all of these issues. The white paper is available on the DragonSearch website, dragonsearchmarketing.com. There should be a link to it from the home page. And it's a quite extensive, in-depth research that I did. I start out with just kind of general digital marketing ideas on why you would want to monitor your brand or an industry term on social media, and what kinds of things to monitor, all the different kinds of variations on how your brand name could be spelled. It could be a stock symbol, it could be a Twitter handle, it could be misspelled all the time, it could be abbreviated, there could be nicknames, or if you're using an industry term, like if you sell blue jeans, you can call them pants, dungarees. There's whole different ways that you can express what you want to look for. So I discuss all the different kinds of variations you should think about before you create your Boolean search. And then I talk about what a Boolean search is, and the basic operators that are commonly used, and then the more detailed ones that some tools also have available to use. And then why some tools are inadequate. What are the inadequacies that I ran into that made it impossible for me to do the kind of queries I needed. And then I go into a detailed case study and where I use a complicated brand name to try to figure out how to build a query that will encompass all of the different variations of the brand name. And then I discuss how you can refine the results further by either adding more operators to the query or to filter the results. And then I conclude with other features to consider if you are shopping for a social media monitoring tool and you want to see what other types of things you would need for your company or for your client. So let's talk about Boolean search operators, just the high-level basics. Most of the time when you talk about Boolean operators, you're talking about and, or, and not. And in this case, I'm going to use an example of pizza toppings. So if you want to use or, that means I want to have any mentions or any pizza toppings that have any of these ingredients. It doesn't have to be all of them. So if I said meat or anchovies or vegetables, and you take a look at the Venn diagram I have, that would say that an everything pizza would count because it has everything on it. A veggie pizza would count because it has vegetables. It's okay if it doesn't have meat or anchovies as long as it has vegetables. And all those other combinations will work as long as they have one or more of these toppings. So it includes a very broad set. If you want to be exclusive, you use the and operand. And that's a way to say that these words, or these toppings, have to be mentioned. So in the case of A and B and C, you're only going to want the mentions that are in all three circles, which is that small blue area in the middle. So if I say, for my pizza, I want pepperoni and broccoli and anchovies, that would include an everything pizza because it has everything on it. But otherwise, any other pizza has to have those three ingredients. It could have more than those three, but it has to have those three ingredients. And that's a way to make it a lot more exclusive and pinpoint exactly what you're looking for. And then there's the not, which helps you exclude things. And not is very important with social media monitoring because you always end up having a lot of stuff that you really don't care about and you need to be able to exclude it. So in my example, if we say we want any pies that have onions or garlic, either of them or both of them, but they can't have anchovies, then that excludes everything in circle C. So anything that's a pizza, an everything pizza would be okay as long as it doesn't have anchovies. A pepperoni and onions pizza is okay because it has the onions, or sausage and garlic and olives is okay because it's got the garlic. Any of those combinations as long as it's either onions or garlic but no anchovies. So that's another way that you can pinpoint what you want and exclude the stuff that you don't want. Now, one of the things that was the biggest limitation I found was the lack of being able to specify order or parentheses in some of the tools that I looked at. Ordering is very important. So in this example, I have A and B or C. And I used an example for tools and social media marketing or SMM. If you put the parentheses on the or statement and you say, well, I want to look for any mentions of tools, and they can either be called social media marketing tools or SMM tools. By having the parentheses at the end, we're saying we want any instance of those two terms, but they have to also mention tools. And that helps us refine what we're looking for, which is the purple area in the Venn diagram. If you move those parentheses to the front, you're saying that, well, we want to have tools and social media marketing, which is what we do want, or the term SMM, which is in circle C, which means we're bringing in every mention of SMM, even if it has nothing to do with tools, and that's going to give us a lot more results than we really care to see. It's not going to help us refine what we want. So if the tool does not let you use parentheses or specify some sort of ordering like that, you might end up with a lot more results than you care for. So my case study deals with a appliance store called PC Richard & Son. They are not a client of ours. Basically, I was trying to think of a really complicated brand name, something that included abbreviations and symbols and that's commonly misspelled. And even I constantly called it PC Richards & Sons and kept forgetting whether it was plural or singular. And so we want to be able to find all of the mentions of this brand name, whether it's spelled correctly or not. And I thought that this is a really good test of any social media monitoring tool. So if you are shopping around for a tool, try to see if its user interface can handle all the variations of this brand name. So I try to think of every combination I could come up with when the PC either has a period or not, a space or not, and if Richard or the son part is plural or singular, and if it's an and word or an ampersand. And also a few other cases where there's no space between the PC and the Richard. And I came up with 40 different ways to express the brand name. And that doesn't even include the times when people don't even bother with the son's part and they just say PC Richards to abbreviate it. Just for this example, I used this number of permutations. So one way you can think of doing it, well, I have this list of 40 ways to spell it. Why don't we do a giant or? This way, or this way, or this way, or this way. But because there are symbols involved, you'd want to use the raw operand to acknowledge those symbols. But that makes it case sensitive. So if you want to include every time people have it in different upper or lower cases, which is every single word could be upper or lower case within the name of the brand, you'd have thousands and thousands of variations. And all of those combinations would be too many. I mean, if you said every combination with the or in the middle of it, you'd probably run into a limitation on the tool because most of them have a limit on the length of the query. Or in the types that have boxes, you can only put in some limited number of keywords in each box, like 5 or 10. So let's build a query that encompasses all of those variations without having to be a giant long statement that could be, you know, error prone if you forget a few variations. So I did it by breaking it down into different parts. First is the PC part. All the different ways to say PC. Spell PC, with or without dots and spaces, upper, lowercase. If we use the raw statement, it would look like the first line there, and it's fairly long, and like I said, it could be error prone. You could forget one variation or another. So one of the good things about Brandwatch is that the symbols are ignored if you don't use the raw statement. So if I say P space C or PC next to each other, that will actually work. It'll work when there's a space in between the P and the C or a dot, or if it's capital or lowercase. It'll handle all of those situations. So that actually, you know, brings down the size of the query quite a bit, so it's not as cumbersome. And then with set B in purple, I have the variations on the Richard part, plural or singular. And then set C would be an additional case when the PC and the Richard parts are stuck together without any spaces. And then once we figure out we've got mentions with the PC Richard part, we want to also find mentions that have the and following it, so that would be and or ampersand. And then we want to find the word son or sons. So we're going to look for pages that have all of those three things on it, and it would look kind of like the framework on the bottom. A and B, the PC and the Richards, or C with no space, and D, which is the and part of it, and the son or the sons. So that's the first query string I tried, and then I had to go through various tweaks to try to get it to work the way I wanted it to. The first issue was, well, if you just have ands, we might end up with a page that says Richard was buying a PC for his son, which has nothing to do with the brand name. So we want to use proximity operators to really make sure that all of these words are right next to each other, which would be an instance of our brand name and not something else random. So I changed all the ands to nears. And in Brandwatch, you can say how far apart you want to have these words from each other. So I said, well, within one word. And the F means follow. So I want the PC to be in front of the Richard. So if I say PC near Richard with the one F, that will exclude any case where it's Richard PC. And then for the and statement, the and part of it, I had an and or a raw ampersand because it's a symbol. And unfortunately, I ran into a limitation where the tool got confused whether it was an and as an operand or and as a string. It thought that it was an operator, like the capital A and D. So because Brandwatch has a lot of wildcards and other sorts of operands, I was able to try to do a substitution. And I used the question mark wildcard, which is representing one character. And I couldn't think of any other words that started with A and had another character and ended in D besides and. So I said, hey, I'm pretty clever. I'll just do an and question mark D, and that will pull in the and without confusing the tool. However, I ran into another syntax limitation where you can't mix the raw and the non-raw terms when you're using near, and so that solution wouldn't work. So in my case, I was able to ignore the and because you really think about it, if you have PC Richard, some word, and sons, it's likely to be and. There's not a lot of other variations that are likely to be in there, so I just skipped it altogether. And that'll also pick up when the and is the HTML form of ampersand, the AMP colon, semicolon, that symbol for HTML that represents an ampersand. So that actually brings in those cases as well. So I ended up with a string that looks like this. In the orange is the PC or the PC with or without spaces, and that will include any periods in the abbreviation, or capital or lowercase. We want it near, within one word, followed by Richard or Richards, or PC Richard or PC Richards as one word without a space. So that's the first part of the query. And then we want that within one word of son or sons. And that was successful. It's a lot smaller than all of those, you know, ors one after the other. And it brings in a lot more variations. And, you know, it's also without the raw statement in all of those, it doesn't matter whether it's upper or lower case. So here's a little sample of some of the results that I got. And as you can see, people sometimes use the dots in the PC part. Sometimes they use an ampersand instead of the word and sometimes they have plural. It does get confusing, and if we didn't have this query that pulled in all of these different variations, we really would have missed out on a lot of mentions. And I think a lot of the examples that you see out there, whether it's a review of a tool or the tool guide itself, they just put in a brand name. You know, they would just put in PC Richard and Son, just the way the company would do it. And you're really missing out on a lot of other mentions when you do that. So it really pays off to think about all the variations and include those variations within reason in your query. You know, if there's something totally out of the question that nobody's going to mention it like that, well, clearly it's not really worth doing. But all of these variations are valid because I do see them out there. So a little note about wildcards. After I built this query and got my successful results, I looked at it some more and thought, I wonder if I could tweak it even more and make it smaller. So there are two different kinds of wildcards you can use. The question mark represents one character. It has to be a character. It can't be nothing or one character. So if I used a question mark after Richard or a question mark after Son, that would find the plural, or any other weird spellings like, you know, Richard with a Z after it or one or whatever, but it won't find Richard singular because it needs to have a character afterwards. So the asterisk wildcard character can represent anything at the end of the word. So just in general, if I had the word Richard star, that would pull in Richard, that would pull in Richards. It would also pull in Richard's son or some other, you know, name or word with Richard in the beginning of it. But in this case, I could probably use it because if with all these near proximity operators, you're really not going to get any other garbage besides something like PC Richard and Son or PC Richards and Sons. You're not going to get PC Richardson and Son. It probably won't be that variation. So your mileage may vary. Use the wildcard if it works. If your brand name or industry term is something that has too many variations and pulls in stuff that you don't want, then you probably don't want to use it and you want to be more specific. So there are a lot of other operators you can use, and some of the tools let you do it as part of the query. Other ones let you do it as a filter after your query to kind of limit what you see in the list of mentions. One of the things is a date range. You can specify exactly what dates you want to look for or a period of time, like a month ago, 2 months ago. You also might want to include or exclude certain domain names. For example, if you have an e-commerce site, you really don't want to see every single product that you happen to list that week in the list of mentions on your own site. So you might want to exclude your own site. You also might want to exclude, for example, listings. Let's say you're a real estate person and you want to find mentions of your building, but you don't want to see every single real estate listing for available apartments out there. So you might want to exclude the real estate sites that just have listings on it. You might also be able to limit the type of data, the type of site that you have, for example, forum, or where the sources come from, like Facebook or Twitter or particular websites. You also might want to filter for geographic location. If you're doing market research to see where your mentions are coming from and you really only care about the New York market, then you might want to limit the list of mentions to just a particular area. You might want to limit who the authors are or what language it's in, as well as the page title. You might want to only look for mentions that are in the page title tag. So I learned a lot doing this case study. I discovered that when you really think about it, there's a lot of variations of brand names and industry terms, and there's a lot of places that you can go to look for other ideas because you might not remember everything. So try Google searches on your brand name or those industry terms. Google Trends, do keyword research, look in Wikipedia. There's all sorts of different resources on how you can find variations of your brand name or industry terms that you want to query. And do the due diligence when you're evaluating which social media monitoring tool you want to use. Check to see what the query functionality is. I guarantee most of the time they're going to say, we allow Boolean searches, or we have a robust query functionality, and they don't show it on the website. A lot of times you really have to either look for in-depth reviews of the tool or get a trial version to see if there's any limitations. And like I said, try that PC Richard and Son brand name. If it can't handle that, then you're bound to run into a situation where it's not going to handle whatever kind of query you need to do for your business. And the more powerful the query functionality is, the more flexibility you're going to have if you need to get around any sort of glitches or limitations in the tool. So, for example, what I did with it, I was able to use wildcards. You know, the more robust the tool is, the easier it's going to be to build the queries. And it takes trial and error. It took me a number of tries before I got a query that I was happy with. Experiment, compare the results you get. Take a look at what mentions it brings in. Is that what you want? Is it too much? Is it too little? Are you missing anything? And actually, you know, what I did is I tried one of the free tools, and I looked to see what results it brought in compared to another tool. And that helped me pinpoint in my query what things I could be missing. And start simple, expand, and count your parentheses. So start building it, maybe use an and statement, make sure the syntax works and the parentheses work, and then put it in the near statement instead to you know, deal with the proximity. And then add various nots at the end to exclude any of the things you don't want, and just build it as you go along. But definitely watch your parentheses, because if they get out of order, then your search query could be out of order and you might be pulling in the wrong things. And one of the must-haves is a proximity operator. If your social media monitoring tool does not let you specify proximity, then you're going to really bring in way more stuff than you really care about. It's really a must-have.
Thanks, Jeanette. Yeah, I think there's some good points there, especially about trialing tools. I think we always recommend that once people have sort of made a short list of the tools, they should try them out, because it really is only when you get to use them properly that you can understand if they suit your needs. Different tools suit different people, and obviously queries are the beginning of where you get your data from, so it's incredibly important that it's doing what you need it to do. Also about, you know, creating your queries and taking your time, and that they can be complex. I think time does need to be spent to get accurate data to write a decent query. I think that's a very good point. Gemma's going to talk us through a couple of her top tips for creating queries.
Yes, so further to some of the key learnings that Jeanette discovered during her case study example for optimizing searches, based on the experience that I've had writing various brand queries for lots of different brands and clients, I'm going to share with you some of my top recommendations for optimizing capture volume and quality from your queries. So to start with, do the research. So Jeanette already touched on this in her case study, but it's really, really important. I can't say that enough. It's important to check brand-owned sites, also check on Wikipedia, and also have a look on Twitter as well, because these sites will really offer you a lot of information about what the brand activity they're involved in, any product information. Wikipedia is a really useful source if you want to find out if your brand has any disambiguation, so if you're going to have to deal with any kind of exclusion terms that you're going to add. So definitely, even before you start constructing your query, even if it's for a brand that is your own company's brand, make sure that you go on and familiarize yourself with kind of all areas of the brand activity, so you can consider this when starting to put your key terms together. And then what to include out of that. So again, Jeanette used in her PC Richards example, she used all the different ways that people might refer to the brand, and that's really, really important to optimize your capture. So think about the official brand names and how those are written, and also any colloquialisms as well. So do people abbreviate the brand or call it by any other kind of nicknames or anything like that, and include those in your search string. Also include any common brand misspellings as well, but try not to be too creative here. Just go for the obvious ones, because you can spend a lot of time coming up with all these creative ways as to how people might spell things, and it won't actually catch you that much more. So just go for the common ones that are likely to occur. And then also include any brand Twitter handles and author names as well. So Twitter is one of the key social media platforms that people are engaging on and talking about brands on. So it's really, really important that we include the Twitter handle, if there are any for your brand that you're searching for, include them in your search string, so that you're also you're capturing that conversation as well that's happening on there. And then when you're dealing with brands that have ambiguous names, so some of the kind of top ones are Apple and Orange, for example, those brands would definitely need context terms adding to the query in order to capture relevant mentions. So it's important when you're adding context terms and linking them to your brand names that you include terms that cover a range of topics. So not just the products of that brand, but also other things that they're involved in. So any kind of campaign terms, charitable activity they might be involved in, and other kind of other topics that people might be talking about online in relation to those brands that it would be important to know if you were trying to find out about them. So things like customer service issues and stuff like that. And also any hashtags as well, so checking on Twitter will give you that kind of information if any key hashtags are being used in relation to those brands. And also any sub-brands as well. So if you're dealing with a brand that requires context terms, so it's an ambiguous brand, but it has products or sub-brands that are quite unique and they don't require context, then it's important to also include those in the search as well. And on the next slide, I'll go over and show you a good example of that. Cool. So here I've just set up a couple of queries for some top global brands. The top one, obviously, H&M. And for this example, I didn't have to use any context terms because I was finding that just a search for the brand terms on its own was capturing good quality mentions. But however, there are lots of different ways that people refer to this brand. So you'll see in the top line, I've included H&M using and as the spelling, and then Henze & Mauritz, which is the official name for the company. And I've included a different spelling there with the Z as well, because people were also using that. And then below that, you've got the section which searches for the most common way that the brand is referred to, which is using the ampersand. And in order to pick that up, I have to use the raw operator. But as Jeanette mentioned before when she was doing the PC Richards & Son example, the raw operator is case sensitive as well. So I've had to include all the different ways that that might be written. And then the last part of that string includes the official Twitter handles as well. So these were the ones that have the verified symbol. So that's where a lot of the brand activity on Twitter will be taking place, and it's important to also include that in the search. And then in the example below, I've used Apple. The first part searches for the official name, so Macintosh and Apple Incorporated, and then obviously Apple itself needs to be linked with context terms, so I've included some kind of top ones that would be mentioned alongside, and then also covering some other types of topics to do with customer service, delivery and support, those kind of things that might be talked about in relation to the brand. And then below that, we've got the unique sub-brands. So Apple is a prime example of a brand which has very unique product sub-brands that will often get talked about without a reference to the Apple brand itself. And so it's important that those are also included in the search. So iPhone, iPad, iPod, iTunes, for example, that all counts in the overall conversations about that brand. Cool. And then on the next slide, I'm going to cover a couple of points that will help you improve your mention quality. So my first tips was focusing on improving capture volume, and now the next tips look at focusing on improving that quality of the results that you're capturing. So a top tip here is using, definitely when you're searching for an ambiguous brand that requires context, like in the Apple example, I would always go for using near over and, as it will link your brand and your context terms closer together, and it will therefore make the mentions that are returning likely to be more relevant and related. And then it's also really, really important to check the quality of the mentions that you're returning from your queries as you're writing them. So you can do that in the test view. There's an option, a window down at the bottom which will show you the results that are being returned for any test searches. You have an option there to view the first page of results and then also view through to the end of what's been returned for the 8-day period that you're allowed in the testing search. what I would recommend doing is definitely having a look through the first few pages of results, and then also going through to the end as well, because then you'll get a real feel for how good your query is working and whether you're getting, you know, a 95% relevancy rate in the mentions that are being returned. And also, once you've saved your query, it's also a good idea to open a dashboard and have a look through the components in the dashboard, because they can really help you get into the data, especially if you're dealing with a big brand like Apple, for example, that's going to capture thousands of results. It's difficult to really look through all of those and check that you're getting a good percentage relevancy. So things like the topics cloud or any spikes in the history over time graph, if you click on those things, they can highlight if there's any kind of obvious terms that are appearing that are totally irrelevant to the brand that you're searching for. And then based on that, you can then go back into your query and either add exclusions or just refine your context terms some more. Cool. And then a last tip from me is something that we use when dealing with really, really big brands that are capturing thousands and thousands of mentions, and it's quite difficult to cut through the noise and get to the really interesting mentions, so the mentions that are actually people passing an opinion about a brand. You will inevitably, with brands like McDonald's, you will see that there's like a lot of advertising type or kind of marketing type mentions that aren't really of as much interest. So a technique that we use is adding pronouns to your query string. So in the example here, I've, my, me, my, mine, etc., and then linking that to your brand terms. That can really help you return the kind of results where people are actually talking about the brand, passing their opinion about the brand. Okay, so I'm going to hand back to Jeanette, and she's going to cover some tips on removing spam.
Well, I discovered that there's a lot of spam out there, if you haven't noticed, and I kept getting mentions that mostly were things like cheap NFL jerseys or you know, discount Viagra, that kind of thing. And while the tools, Brandwatch as well as many other tools, have some sort of spam filter, these spam sites are really sneaky. They scrape a lot of other content, and then they put these little links all over the place in it. So it's very hard to detect it. So what I did is I created a piece of a query string that removed any of the mentions that had typical keywords like buy, discount, cheap, outlet, blah, blah, blah. That's within a couple of words of the popular brand names that tend to be in the spam. Now, of course, if you're a store and you sell NFL jerseys, you're not going to want to have this exact string in it because you'll exclude all of your mentions. But you know, take a look at the junk that comes back with your queries and pick out the ones that seem to show up a lot and create a little anti-spam Boolean string like this one. And then I just copy and paste that and I add it to the end of all of my queries just to help weed out some of the junk. And it did cut down the number of irrelevant mentions quite a bit. I seem to see that most of them show up in forums. People like to post in forums. They create, you know, spammers create an account and then they scrape garbage and they put it in there with all of these links. If your brand doesn't really care about discussions on forums, then you could try to, you know, filter out those kinds of sites. But I found that this little anti-spam string helped a lot. And creating the query is not a one-time deal. I am constantly going in there and tweaking it. Almost every time that I look at mentions, I run into something else that is irrelevant and I want to take it out. For example, if your brand name could also be somebody else's last name, you might find out, you know, if your brand name is, okay, my last name's Pazer. Let's say there's a Sue Pazer and a John Pazer and all these other Pazers that we don't really care about. You can put that in your query, not quote Joe Pazer, not quote, you know, whatever other name. And every time you find these irrelevant mentions, whether they be Twitter handles, people's names, or other kinds of sites that have similar industry terms or brand names that are not relevant to you, exclude them. Put the not in there. Every time that you do that, your query gets more and more precise, the number of mentions go down, and your results are much more accurate, and therefore your analysis will be a lot more accurate because you don't have all this irrelevant stuff. So just keep doing that, and as time goes on, you'll find out that when you weed through your mentions, you'll find that there are less and less irrelevant ones, and that it'll actually become really efficient because you can trust most of your mentions when you keep weeding out all of the bad stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Jeanette. I think that's a good point about going sort of back into your query once you've saved it. Don't just leave it forever. Obviously, if you do find irrelevancies coming up, then you should exclude those. But also, just changing your query every now and again to reflect sort of new brand names, new products, or changes in the way people talk about things, or new hashtags that come out. All that kind of thing is really important to keep your query up to date. And you'll find over time that your queries become more and more complex. So we've got some queries that we've had for several years now that are quite daunting to look at first glance, but those are things that have been built up over time. And it's definitely a case of iteration and practice and adding in more and more terms that will eventually you get as good a query as you can. So we're going to go through some of the questions we've got so far. Continue to keep asking them in the chat box, and we'll try and make our way through them. If we don't get to your question or you think of anything after the session, then feel free to email us. Here's our contact details. So I'll work my way through the ones we've got so far at the moment. So the first is this tool just for English language, because we are a Spanish company? Brandwatch actually tracks data in 25 languages, one of which is Spanish. So you can collect data in any one of those languages. The actual interface is in English, but we do have Spanish-speaking account managers. What would you do if you were looking at a query like rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis, where people usually use common acronyms like RA or MS to talk about it? Gemma, did you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. So for those kind of acronyms that obviously on their own would capture potentially lots of other irrelevant terms, it would be really, really important to link them to context terms. So we would have initially in the search rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis as searches on their own for the full terms, and then with the abbreviations we would link it to any other kind of context terms that would be mentioned around those abbreviations in the right context.
Great. Okay, next one is for Jeanette. Someone said, but the sun part was a must-have term in your query. Why didn't you take this part off? Then if the person just said, oh, I went to PC Richard and it was great, you would have found it.
Well, I used it for the example. I wanted to look for all the combinations of PC Richard and sun. As I mentioned briefly, I said that that did not include the times when people skipped looking at the sun part. Because I just wanted a complicated enough example that had a lot of different parts of a brand name to search for. But yeah, if there's really not likely to be any other mentions out there for something called PC Richard, then sure, we probably could have just searched for PC Richard. You know, and it really depends on your brand name. Like I said, this was a case study, and I wanted to try to start with something complicated and come up with every variation. So, you know, if this is a real client, PC Richard probably would have been good enough, and I wouldn't need to do the sun part. But in this case, it made it more interesting.
Okay. I'm not sure I 100% understand the next question, but I'll do my best to answer it. So it's how can we add manual search domains or URLs rather going for Google search? So I'm going to answer the two things I think you might be asking. One is you can search queries for specific sites or URLs. So we have a URL and a site operator that allow you to put in a specific website that you want to track data from, and then when you save your query, you'll get all the mentions from that site if they match your query string. In terms of possibly might be asking if you can add domains that you want us to crawl. We cover over 70 million sources, so it's quite a lot, but if you do find a site that you don't think we crawl or we don't have data for, then we can add those in. You just get in contact with our support team and they'll add it to the database for you. The next one is for you, Jeanette. You mentioned that you used a free tool, and they want to know which one did you try?
I did a trial version of TalkWalker. I tried Mention.net, which, some of these have a free version, but they're a little more limited if you don't pay for it. And I also use the one that Moz has, Fresh Web Explorer, and they're in my white paper. Some of the limitations I ran into, I documented in the white paper when I tried using these other free tools.
Great.
But it is interesting when you do try to do the same search with different tools and you look to see what you get back, and you'll notice that they're different and they come in at different speeds. Some of them will find the mention right away, some of them a half hour, some of them don't find it at all. So it just kind of goes to prove that none of these things are totally flawless. You need to find the tool that works the best for you and that brings in the most relevant results when you need them.
Yeah, I think we often get asked what's the best tool, and I don't think there's any such thing as a best. It really depends on your needs and your budget and what you're searching for and when you need the data. And so that's a good point about trying out lots of different ones. Gemma, you're probably best placed to answer this. I know we get asked this quite a lot. Is how will you know when you are done with creating your query?
Okay, yeah, good question. How long is a piece of string, basically? It's difficult to know because obviously we don't know exactly what's going to be out there for any brand search that we're doing. But kind of key things that you can do is just to have in your mind, okay, who am I searching for? So in the search for Apple, for example, you know that that's a huge brand that is likely to be talked about a lot. So you would be expecting results returning in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if you're doing like a general kind of search in English, for example. But then if you're dealing with something that's a slightly smaller brand that's not being talked about as much online, then you obviously would be expecting kind of lesser volume. So it's kind of having that in your mind, like how much should you expect to be returning, and then also by kind of following the tips that I covered. So as long as you've done your research, you've included as many different ways that the brand can be referred to. If you're dealing with an ambiguous brand, that you've included lots of different context terms that cover a broad range of topics, and that you've tested and you've refined your search, and that the results that you're getting back are, for an ambiguous brand, if you're getting like 90% plus, so if you look through 100 mentions and 90 of those are relevant, then I would say you're onto a good query there. It's very, very difficult to get them completely 100% perfect when you're writing searches for ambiguous brands. So it's kind of like applying all of those things and having them in your head when you're writing your searches. And also you have your time constraints as well. So how much time do you have to do this? So within that time, try and do cover all of those things that Jeanette and I have kind of recommended to optimize your searches. And then once you've saved your query, go back to it. So don't just leave it and expect it to be perfect and carry on collecting everything going forward. Reiterate, go back in and check it sort of every month or so, and just make sure that it's capturing the right kind of things.
Great. We've only got 10 minutes left and we've got quite a lot of questions, so we're going to try and work through them quickly, or try and get through as many as we can. So someone's asked, complex Boolean queries like Jeanette's can be hard for many people in our industry, and is there a prompt or assist type function available in Brandwatch? Yes, there can be quite complex. We do always give initial training to everyone who signs up in query creation. We also offer additional training if you want to pay for more training to make yourself a superstar in queries, then you can do so. But we try and make it as easy as possible. So in the query creation, you can see in the examples Gemma showed, we have a sort of color coding that highlights different operators that you're using, so you can keep track of how you're building your query. You also have quite a comprehensive list of operators, so that tells you what each of them does and how you can use them. We've also got a support portal and also on our blog, and there's lots of content there about creating different types of queries and tips for creating queries, and examples and additional strings that you can add in, like Jeanette's spam one. So try and help as much as possible. Uh, Gemma, you use the tilde1 operator, that's the little squiggle for those who don't know, in your H&M query. Can you explain what it is?
Yeah, so it's basically another proximity operator like near. So if you put words in phrase in speech marks, and then you decide that potentially there could be other words that appear in between. So I used it for hens Moritz, and that was to include whether people write it like that or if they also include an and in between. So it basically counted as like it finds hens and Moritz within one word of each other, basically. And you can, like the near operator, you can put whatever value you want to have the proximity between those terms.
Great. Someone has asked if there's any way to look up profiles by email. I don't fully understand that question. I think the answer is no, but if you'd like to email us and ask for some more detail and explain a bit further, we'll be happy to help. What's the best way to track a hashtag competition? I would suggest using the cite operator and restricting it to Twitter if that's where you're running a competition, and then using raw, which will track the actual hashtag, and then the different capitalization variations of the cases. Gemma, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that?
No, I'd agree, totally.
Someone's asked, how do you exclude a domain or URL in a search? So as I mentioned before, you have a cite or a URL operator, so you can just combine that with the not operator and say not cite, and then write the site name, and then that site won't appear in your results anymore. Someone says, not a question, but DragonSearch have just put up an infographic that shows why variations matter. I'm sure if you can contact Annette, she'll be happy to give you the link.
Yep, it's on Twitter. Look at DragonSearch Twitter.
Sure. Someone said it'd be good if we could provide a library of common excludes for spam, for example, that could save time or be slightly altered. We actually do. There's an article on our blog called the Social Media Monitoring Cheat Sheet, and that's got examples of different query strings you can put in for, I think it's spam, or for emotive language, and for customer service type mentions. Someone's put, does it make a difference using capital letters or not, because you use them in the main H&M query but didn't in your last query. Unless you're using raw, the cases don't matter. It's usually just a matter of habit that when people write their queries, they tend to put in the capitals at the beginning of brand names. But unless you're using raw, you can write whatever capitalization in your query you like, and it won't matter. What is the best way to gather results if your brand is a name? For example, if we set up a query to find mentions of the film Diana, but wanted to exclude when that name is mentioned not in reference to the film. Gemma, do you want to take that?
Yes, so again, just adding lots of context to do with the film. So, or linking it with things like watching Diana, I guess. Yeah, it would be quite a complicated search to set up, but yeah, with the right kind of context terms, you could definitely get a good percentage of relevancy returning.
I think there's always a balance with queries between when you're adding context terms of adding enough so you get enough data, but also not adding so much that you then get lots of irrelevant data. So you have to work out the balance between getting too much and not enough. But yes, I think context terms would be definitely needed there. Gemma, they've said, on your H&M example, why was the raw option needed? Wouldn't the first line adequately capture all H&M options?
So the raw line was included to pick up where the ampersand is used. So in fact, when I did initially start writing that query, I did just test H and M without picking up the and in between, but it was picking up loads of other irrelevant brands that just have H space M at the beginning. So in order to pick up the ampersand, it was really important then to use the raw operator and all the different case examples.
Yeah, as Jeanette mentioned in hers one, within Brandwatch, if you don't use raw, then special characters are treated as spaces. So that and would have counted as a space if we hadn't used raw. Someone's asked about our sentiment algorithm and if it's something you can update with keywords or phrases. I won't go into lots of details, it's not that query related, but our sentiment algorithm, you can manipulate it by setting up your own rules. So if you've got particular keywords that in your industry or your region might be misclassified, or for example, like music, we often find people say things like, oh, this is a sick tune, which might be classed as negative. You can set up rules to categorize those in the sentiment that you want. So yes, you can. Any advice if your name is XXUK and your affiliate is just XX, but people will talk about you using XX and there aren't any obvious things to exclude as you do very similar work? Gemma? Quite a tricky one.
Yes, for sure. Again, it's just going to have to be really like so kind of finding those context terms that are specific to your brand and not the other. So yeah, being really, really choosy about the terms that you add there and making sure that they are unique enough to your brand. Yeah, and that's it's going to involve quite a bit of testing, I think. So each term that you add, like just having a look at the results and checking that they're the right things, because that's another thing. When you start adding context, when you keep adding context at the end, you can't always see how well that has affected the results because it's just adding to the overall pot. So if there's ever a context term you're not sure how it's going to work with the brand, I recommend removing what string you've written already and pasting it into a notepad or a Word document, and then just testing your brand with that context term, and then you'll see the exact results that get returned based on that term and whether it's a good one to add.
Okay. Someone has asked if there's any way to exclude an entire page type in your query other than Twitter or Facebook. Yeah, so in Brandwatch we do categorize by page type, which you can then filter out once you've saved your query. At the moment, you can't exclude by page type at the query level, other than saying not specific sites, so then Twitter and Facebook. I know it's something that's been discussed. You can always submit requests. We always take into account user requests, possibly in future. I tried to exclude irritable bowel syndrome from a search that revolved around irritability. How would I remove all mentions of irritable bowel syndrome? I tried adding irritable, not bowel, at the end of my query, but it did not remove all mentions. Gemma?
Yeah, that would be something that I'd probably have to have a go at. I can't think off the top of my head, but yeah.
Yeah, I think
something that I could try outside of have a go in the tool and see what I can come up with. I can't think of an answer off the top of my head, but
if you're sorry, I was just going to say, if you're a Brandwatch client and you've got an account manager here, then feel free to speak to them. I'll probably be able to help you out. Gemma, could you answer, will near and raw operators ever be supported together?
Yes, so there is in fact a way that you can use the raw operator with near. It's a bit of a workaround that we discovered when I was setting up a query to look for mentions of Google+. And one way that people refer to Google+ is just having G and plus. However, searching for that on its own did bring back irrelevant mentions. So I had to use the raw operator so that I would pick up the plus symbol next to the G, and then I also needed to add context terms as well. Now I tried it with the AND operator because you can use AND with the raw, but the results I was getting weren't very good quality. So I actually discovered that you can use the raw operator the other side of the near, as long as you use it both sides, basically. So where I had used the raw operator for the G+, I then added the near to then link my context, and then as long as I use raw for all of the context terms that I added, it allows it. So it basically balances out the equation so that you have raw both sides. But obviously what you need to take into account that if you are using raw with your context terms, then that it will be case sensitive. So I had to add lots of different letter case ways of writing my context terms, but it does work. So that is a way round of being able to use it when you are using the near operator. Just make sure that you have it both sides of the near.
Right, we've hit the end, but we've only got 5 more questions, so I'm going to work through those very quickly. If you want to stick around, then feel free. Someone's asked, shall I get a trial version of any searching tool? We always recommend to get trials of tools. You'll have to contact each of them individually. If you want a demo of Brandwatch, then feel free to get in touch. Someone's asked, how is it different from Radian 6? That is not a question I can answer quickly right now. Feel free to contact us and we'll be happy to talk to you about differences between us and Radian 6 and give you some third-party reviews that compare us and that kind of thing. Someone's asked how to build a query or queries to monitor an open debate with no big brand names or brands related. Do you handle them afterwards by groups or categories or dashboards? I'm not 100% sure what you mean, but if we're tracking topics, we still build a query in the same way that we would for a brand. We just use the terms for the topic. It can be more complicated than just tracking a brand name, but it is possible. We just use this sort of phrases that are being used to discuss that topic, and any hashtags and that kind of thing. Someone's asked about using the sort of minus sign instead of not. Those things are interchangeable. So for those of you who don't know, you can use minus instead of the word not to mean the same thing. You can use either or, they work in the same way. With the site operator, can you stick this to more than one site? Yep, so you'd have to write site colon, the name of the site, and then do that for each of your sites. You can have as many as you like within your character limit writing your query. Someone's asked, is there an operator for that one? For the XX or XX UK brands, you use country or country, i.e. or country UK or country US. I'm not sure I understand that. Gemma?
No, I don't know if I do either.
Sorry.
Maybe if I have a look at the question, yeah, sorry. Maybe it's something I can have a look at afterwards, see if I can figure out.
Okay. Right, I think we're gonna. Sorry, Drew, my colleague, has just said he thinks. I mean, that is there an operator for country specification? Yes, you can track different countries, and you could also track different cities within your query using different operators. There is a thing on the query creation box that lets you say which country, and it'll give you the code for that one. Okay. I think that's us coming to an end now. If you have any more questions, then feel free to email us or tweet us, as I said, and we'll be happy to get back to you. Thank you to our panelists today, and thank you all for joining.